Hi, what's going on, y'all? Let me see here. All right. Hi, thank y'all for joining me today. My name is John Newby, and this is the Watchman Podcast. We're a group of chaplains that are here to serve those who serve. We like to help those with first responders and military with any of your issues that you have, spiritual or mental. And everyone here has been in the military or been a first responder to some nature and are retired or still active like myself in law enforcement, and we're here for you. You can reach us at phone number 850-460-5785. Again, that's 850-460-5785. Or you can email us at contact@serveministriesinc.com. Our address is P.O. Box 218, Niceville, Florida, 32588. Again, that's address P.O. Box 218, Niceville, Florida, 32588. That's Nancy, India, Charlie, Echo, Victor, India, Lima, Lima, Echo, Florida, 32588. All right, I'm here with a friend of mine who's a chaplain, and I look up to him a lot. Bill, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
William Kizziar, Bill Kizziar. Happy to be here. Just call me Bill. If you want to know anything more than that, you can really go to the SMI website and go to Meet Us under the SMI website, and it'll list all that stuff because I really don't prefer qualifying myself. It just seems egotistical. So I stay off of that. You want to know about me, go look it up. That's really all I can say about that. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, Bill wrote or has some information he would like to talk about, a very serious topic, and that's suicide. And this is kind of impromptu. I didn't dive into anything that he's going to say. I kind of wanted the shock value, the just him giving it to me and like a first time response, and so it's authentic. And this is a very tough, touchy topic, and it can really pull at the heartstrings of a lot of people. And so it's a very serious topic. And we tell them about your book, or what was it that you wrote?
Well, the book is called Suicide, the Bible and You, and it's available in some places. We'll get to that later, but it's called The Suicide, the Bible and You. You're Not Alone, Not Ever. It's a book that I wrote as part of a research project when I went to college, and it was written in, actually, it's a third revision now that I wrote while I was doing my Master of Divinity course at Lipscomb University. And so this was the research papers that I did. All of my research was geared towards suicide in one way or another. And at Freed Hardeman, it got to a point where they told me, Bill, we don't want you to write on suicide anymore because all of my papers were geared toward suicide prevention and suicide ideology and suicide within the Bible. So as the years went on, I collected all this material and I put it into a book format. And then as time went on, that was just too detailed. It was really detailed, research paper type stuff. And so I redacted it and narrowed it down to a smaller one, 140 pages or something like that. And then recently I have redacted it again, and it's available at this point. I think it's 141 pages long or something like that. But anyway.
So that what made you want to get into this topic?
Well, we talked the other night, John, when we kind of brought this out, and I kind of want to. Well, I'll just go ahead and get through a real brief thing, and then we'll kind of, because I want to give that disclaimer before we get too far into this. But as a means of a little bit of personal testimony here with regards to why I'm into this topic and stuff. In 1996, my only biological son completed the act of suicide. And so when that happened, of course, as anybody who is a survivor of suicide knows that it's a very traumatic thing. And so it just set me on a course to try to figure out, how to define that. What does that mean to say, suicide awareness or suicide prevention? What does that mean? I mean, where is that? How do you understand that? What's the disposition of the soul of one who completes the act of suicide? What happens to the soul? So we started this a nonprofit way back then, and it kind of grew from there. So this whole thing, this whole endeavor, is consequential to the suicide of my only biological 15-year-old son. His name was BJ. So that's what started it.
So a couple key characters or men in the Old Testament, especially that pop into mind. Obviously, there's Judas in the New Testament, but so was it King Josiah where he fell on the sword? Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, it wasn't Josiah. Well, I don't know. Josiah knows Saul's armor bearer was one of those who completed suicide, if you will. And actually, in the material, there's chapter 2 of the material that talks about the suicides that are within the Bible. And actually, I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different cases of suicide in the Bible, or as people have seen what they think is suicide in the Bible and why
Right.
it is or it isn't.
Can I ask you about one real quick and
Sure.
look at your perspective? So, you can imagine Samson is one of my favorite
Okay.
people in the Bible. Okay, obvious reasons. I love strength stuff. So, now I know Samson probably didn't look like a strong man or a bodybuilder because he was there to glorify God. And I did a video on that if y'all want to check that out on my channel, because it's not about Samson looking tough and rough. It's about the power of the Holy Spirit working through a man. But anyways, Samson, when he brought down the pillars, how do you view that?
Well, Samson actually is, I have what I call a suicide flow chart. And actually, and this we'll get to in a little bit, but actually, I have designated Samson as an aggressive, irrational case of suicide. There's two things there. One, you can find this in Judges 16:28, as where Samson takes care of business, if you will. But on the one hand, Samson was captured by the Philistines. I won't go into the whole story of that. But upon his death, when they brought him out, he was standing at the pylons or the pillars. That's escaping what the name of that the auditorium, the whatever they were standing in. It's gone from now. But as it began to, before he began to push out the pillars, he said, Lord, give me the strength to do this one more thing, do this one more thing. So on the one hand, where Samson was, he killed, and again, there's more to this but the aggressive and passive suicides, an aggressive suicide is one where others were killed in the act. I got in here Harrison Klebold from Columbine shootings, right? They did a mass shooting and then they completed suicide upon before being caught. So that's kind of an aggressive act of suicide. Others were killed in the act. Samson killed others during his act of suicide. But because it was just impromptu, it was unplanned. It was, from what we know the Bible, it was just unplanned. He did it. I subcategorize it as an irrational act. Now, whether Samson's soul went on to heaven or not, it's only speculation on my part. I have no idea. But because Samson was in some sense acting on God's behalf to rid the world of these nasty Philistines, then perhaps you might be able to say he was acting on God's behalf. So that may hold sway in some way. But Samson, in what I have got in my system, is an aggressive, irrational act, and he because he's over the age of 20, he may or may not be in Tartarus or hell. But we'll get some more of that in a little bit.
Right. So, in that, what I was going to ask you. So, I kind of took Samson doing the bringing down the pillars as an act of judgment, that God used him as a tool to judge. And but I see what you're saying. So
Well,
how
that's it right there, John. It could be that because he was seen as a tool of judgment, that could be his saving grace.
right.
But I'm not one who can sit in judgment of that. I just have to give that to God and say, Lord, you know what? That's bigger than I am. And so, you do your thing.
So that would be my next follow-up question. How can we differentiate when somebody is being used as a tool by God for judgment versus an aggressive suicide? Or is that what the term you used? What was it again?
Oh, one, if others were killed, right, an aggressive suicide.
Right. So how
This is
can,
my
yeah.
opinion.
And so I guess what you would have just said was is that that's really up to God to decide, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Now, I have speculated, but we're not even that far in the conversation yet, Jonathan.
Okay. Am
We,
I
we start we start talking about
am I am
the
I getting
alphabet.
am I putting the cart before the horse?
Yeah, the cart
Okay.
is before the heart. You're
All
already
right.
on
All right,
L, and I
brother.
haven't even talked about A
All
and
right.
B yet. I mean,
All
I've
right.
already talked about A, but we're trying to
I
get
got
to B and C.
I gotta turn the cop mode off.
You'll get there
All right.
as we move on, but there's a couple things that we have to talk about. You're video recording this and you're putting this on out there in the YouTube world. I would encourage even you, Jonathan, as we go through this, I would encourage you to go to my podcast if you have the capability on two screens to do that. And it's williamkazar.podbean.com. Because tonight, what we're going to talk about is simply the information that's on there. There's recordings in there, and we're just not going to get there. There's too much. So anybody who's going to listen to this audio or watch this video here, I encourage you to first go to William Kizziar. And for those who don't know, my last name is spelled, it's on the screen here. So it's Kizziar, williamkazar.podbean.com, and bring that webpage, bring up that podcast. Jonathan, I'll use you as a guide when you get to that. If you let me know you're there.
All right. William Kazar dot what was it again?
Podbean, Podbean, Bean, Podbean.
I think I found it.
So the first thing you'll see is says Suicide the Bible and You.
Yep.
It's a black screen.
I got it. I got it.
Okay. If you scroll down, you have a little thing about the portraits are welcome. Hear me, where we'll talk about this, the silence of scriptures. We'll talk about that after death chart. You go down more, there's a suicide flow chart where Samson was listed. There's some more information there, but someone I know has died. What do I do? How do I respond? And then there's a suicide intervention that's listed on there. Now, below all of that are 10, 30-minute, give or take, audio or videos on there explaining a lot of this stuff. But if you're more the academic type and you want to get into the crux and detail of all this, you're going to have to order the book because that's where all that stuff is. So, but for right now, I want to.
Do you mind if I put this link on my YouTube channel with this video? Are you cool with that?
Yeah, go right ahead. I mean, it's been on there for a while now. It's been out there for some time. It's probably coming up for renewal. And
Yeah, so I'm looking at your after death thing. This looks interesting.
We'll get to it. We're not there yet. There's some disclaimers that have to be put out here first.
Okay.
And then we can talk about some of those things. Now, I want to put out here that on the Serve Ministries website, serveministriesinc.com website, we put our newsletters, our monthly newsletters on there. And on there, these books are available. And if you go there and you click on a book and you want to get a copy of the book, it's hard to get this book. This is well, it's over here. I print these myself here. So these are printed brand new copies and cut and bound and all that kind of stuff. And I do all this stuff. And so I control distribution of it. And here's why. Because we're going to talk about some things on here that may give a teenager or a child the idea that committing suicide, if they do that, then they're going to go to paradise. And so I don't want them to have that idea. So, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So I want to read the disclaimer that's in the material here. Right here on like the very first page here, before the preface, it says, warning, if you read this book and then complete the act of suicide, you will likely go to hell. Then again, even if you do not read this book and you complete the act of suicide, you will likely go to hell. And in this sense, it's Tartarus, and we'll get to that as well. So I intentionally make it hard to get the book because I don't really want to put it into the hands of young people unless they've had the opportunity to hear some of this stuff and to kind of to get some teaching on this, because I would never want a teenager to be able to say, oh, well, you know, William Kazar said that if I complete the act of suicide and I'm 19 or younger, then I'll get to go to heaven. So let's just take care of business. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. If you have read this material, if you are listening and watching this YouTube, I guess I should be focusing on the camera, but if you are watching and listening to this video and you're going through this, then you have become aware. Once you are aware, you cannot use the excuse, I'm only 17, therefore I'll go to heaven. No, because you've been told. you can't use that innocence anymore because you've already been told about this. So that just needs to be a disclaimer that's out there kind of right off the
So it's
front.
kind of like an age of accountability, like how certain denominations believe, correct?
Well, age of accountability is also talked about in the book, and I don't like the whole age of accountability because some folks will try to key on Jesus as being 12 years old, and I think that accountability. I don't talk about age of accountability in as much as I talk about accountability without the age moniker on there, because I think there's a big difference, and there's some different things about accountability. We're not going to get into it tonight because it's detailed, it's involved, and if you want to get into all that, there's a little bit of it on the podcast. There's more of it in the book. If you guys, anybody who wants that, can get the book, and you can just go on from there and read about that. But as we kind of get into this, there's a couple of points here on the podcast that I know, Jonathan, you're looking at here. And I just want to read these things here for the benefit of your viewers here and kind of go through touch on a couple of these things before we get into some more the meat of this. On the very first page of the podcast, it reads, Suicide, the Bible, and You, because there are times when all I can do is weep. All I can do is fall to my knees and beg to know why. All I can do is endure the breaking of my heart all over again. All I can do is blame myself and wonder why God has turned his back. All I can say to others thinking about ending their own lives is don't. And I don't even know how else to kind of put that. There's scroll down a little bit on that, Jonathan, you'll come to a little thing that says, hear me roar. And I can't say this enough. I'm going to read it for the benefit of your viewers here. It's short enough. It says, suicide is not a title or action for those who have completed the act, but rather an eternal consequence endured by those left behind. Suicide awareness and prevention. When it comes to suicide awareness, people are killing themselves every day. Do you know that? Then you are aware. When it comes to suicide prevention, this is where I say, hear me roar. Don't do it. It's as simple as the Nancy Reagan slogan of the 80s or whatever with regards to drugs. Just say no. This is my effort to tell you, just don't do it when it comes to suicide and contemplating suicide. There are consequences you won't be around to endure, but your family or your friends and your family will be. If I could get a message across to anybody, Jonathan, I'm looking at your picture now. Camera's over there. I'm looking at you on my other screen here. This would be a part of that. Okay. So there's my disclaimers or my little things I want to put out there first off, and then try to get into some of this. And because I know that it's just important, before we even talk about the podcast or these things, this screen or the after death chart kind of goes with the silence of scriptures. We'll get to that in a minute. But if you wanted to make that bigger so you could see it, you could tell the viewers who don't know, you can right click on the actual chart itself and open it as a new image, and you'll bring that sucker up to the full page and be able to see the details of the texts that are there. You get the whole picture involved. So, but I want to read something from the introduction. It's not that long, but it is very, very important to this whole idea of suicide. And the question that's being talked about here is, what is the disposition of the soul of one who completes the act of suicide? And later on, who's accountable for that? So this becomes very, very important when we start talking about it. And I will just say in the beginning that the whole suicide prevention, my idea for suicide prevention is to let people know what the consequences of the act are going to be. A lot of counseling and everything will try to focus on suicide prevention with pre-event or pre-act counseling to try to dissuade that suicide ideology. Hey, here's my argument for you. This is what's going to happen to your soul if you do it. Is that what you want? Is that where you want your soul to go? So that's kind of my argument with suicide prevention. This is what's going to happen. And if you know what may happen to you or your soul if you kill yourself, then maybe it will dissuade you from doing that act. And so that's my whole approach. Go ahead.
Now, if this question is like what I did earlier by putting the cart before the horse, then just tell me, you'll get to that later. So I have no problem. Okay.
Hey.
All right. So you're speaking of awareness. What about somebody who's mentally handicapped or has Asperger's or something like that?
You know what? I'll consider that a great segue into the after death chart.
Okay.
So you're not really putting the cart before the horse. You're really just kind of bringing the horse and the cart out of the barn.
10-4. All
And
right.
we'll go with that right now.
All right.
So it kind of goes, as we kind of scroll down here, it kind of goes to the silence of scriptures. And if you're on the Podbean, the williamkizziar.podbean.com site, and you scroll down, you'll come to on the one side it says after death chart, and on the other side it says the silence of scriptures. So let's read that just a minute there, if you're there. Some say, speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent. And this is the beginning of the matter for this writer, because how we worship God depends on how we interpret the scriptures. The Bible does not condone nor condemn suicide. So it is paramount that we do our best to understand the Holy Spirit's guidance on this matter. In our attempts to expand our knowledge and understanding, we may benefit from knowing a little about the doctrine of the Hadean realm, or the Hadean world, the realm. So this silence of scriptures thing, it's either prohibitive or it's permissive. Now, let me give you an example. You go to church and you use an electric guitar. Does the Bible say you can use an electric guitar in your worship services? No, it doesn't. If the Bible doesn't say you can, then you can't. If the Bible doesn't say you can't, then you can. You see the nuance there, John? It's like it's on silent. The Bible is silent on the issue of a very contemporary use of an electric guitar in worship services. The Bible doesn't say, well, hold on. In the hardcore churches of Christ and conservative churches will say, well, the Bible doesn't say we can use a guitar, harps or something else from ancient. But a guitar, the Bible doesn't say we can use a guitar, so we can't. Hold up, time out. The very liberal group will say, hold up, the Bible doesn't say we cannot use a guitar, so we can. So the silence of scriptures and how we understand that is paramount to this whole thing here. And I'll get to that in a little bit here, but it depends on how you interpret scripture, right? Whether you interpret permissively or you interpret it prohibitively. It just depends on you and how you're going to interpret things. That's why we have 3,000 different denominations in the United States alone, because everybody interprets it a little bit different. And there you go. Okay, so let's go to before I go forward, questions, John, before we get that horses and cart out and start talking about the after death chart?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear you flow, baby. Let's go.
Okay, well, let's go. Now, I have expanded opened up the after death chart into another tab so I can see it very, very clearly. Now, let me see if I can explain this to you. First off, let's go back to the idea about, well, hold up. Before I even do that, I got to read this to you. Now, I read pretty fast. So, Jonathan, if at some point I'm getting on this too quick, you need to say something because I'm reading, I'm not looking at you, right? Say, slow down, Bill, slow down. What? Whatever you got to do there, okay? So
right.
I think it's important to note that we get this. This is from the introduction of the book. I'll try to put it for so I can catch you to say something. We live in a world of opposites. If there is day, there is night. If there is life, there is death. If there is heaven, there is hell. If there is nothing, there is something. Because we live a physical life and die a physical death, we will also live a spiritual life and die a spiritual death. I do not understand why this is so hard for people to understand. My daughter, while attending college in Tennessee, was telling me about an atheist professor and how he was going on and on about how there was no God. Once we die, there is nothing. Because this is a world of opposites, we must realize that if there is nothing, there must be something. And that something after death is the Hadean world. Now, for the Old Testament scholars, the New Testament concept of Hades would be akin to the Old Testament concept of Sheol. That when the bodies die in the Old Testament, they go to Sheol. In the New Testament, it's called Hades.
Because Sheol is Hebrew and Hades is Greek.
That's correct. So there's different words there, but it's the same place.
It's the same. It's the word used in Greek Septuagint.
Correct. Okay. Well, I would delve into that, but that's a carrot. I'm not going to go into that carrot there. We're going to try to stay on topic right here. Lots to talk about with all this.
Are you speaking about Abraham's bosom?
Well, that would be synonymous with paradise.
Yeah.
So no, I was thinking about the Septuagint.
Okay.
Okay. So to continue on there, if we exist here now on earth, we must exist later after death, or we must exist there later after death. We do not simply go poof upon death into nothingness. That would negate the purpose of our being here in the first place, wouldn't it? That purpose being to have fellowship with God. So what is the opposite of up, if not down, of short, if not tall, of black, if not white? It makes no sense to believe there is nothing from something. There must be something, life, if there is nothing, non-life. If this is the seen world in which our senses tell us we live, then its opposite is an unseen world in which our senses cannot verify.
So are you saying, like, for something to be proven by one side, there has to be an other side to it? Like, for you to have a magnet, for it to have a positive, you also have to have a negative. For you to have a north, you have to have a south, because it has to coincide with it, or you wouldn't have a north.
That's correct. There's always an opposite.
Yeah.
And so my point with this introduction piece here is that if we live a physical life, then we must also have a spiritual life. Physical versus spiritual. Physical we can touch, spiritual we cannot.
Yeah. And I would add to that we have the testimony of God in the flesh, who says that there's the evidence of the resurrection, that Jesus Christ died and rose again, is it's outstanding evidence. And he speaks and says, if somebody died and rose again 3 days later and does miracles and claims to be the eternal Son of the Father, and there's evidence of this, and I'm going to listen to what he says. So I would add that to what you're saying.
Right. And let's talk about it in a contemporary sense.
Okay.
How am I going to believe that there is a Hades? How am I going to believe that? Now we know from the great gulf in Luke 16:19 through 31 talks about the gulf that you can't cross, right? Yep. You can't go past that. So if Elvis Presley came back to life, and I could verify it was him some way, and he told us, hey, look, this is true. You know, he got a reprieve from hell or wherever he's at, to come back. That's the only way we're going to know for sure if there really is a Hadean world or a Hadean realm. If somebody who was dead came back and said, hey, look, it's really there, I got to go by. And he takes off and they take off and go back. But we're not going to have that. We do have what you say, Jonathan. We do have the testimony of the Bible, and we want to and need to believe the truth in that. Right. Okay. So let's get on here to the after death chart. Now, if you look right down at the bottom down here, you'll see that the original source was unknown, and it comes from January 1st of 1991. I modified this back in November. The modification was mostly complete by November 29, 2008. So this has been modified from its original form. Okay, let's look at the after death chart. You'll see right off the back, there's pretty much 3 sections to this. The left side, the center, and the right side. So let's talk about the left side first. If you'll look at that, you'll see that there's 4 rings or 4 circles involved there. A smaller center circle that says church with a little cross inside there in a reference to Ephesians 1, verse 22. The second circle around there says worldly in it, and it has a reference of 1 John 4:5. In the third circle, look where the arrow points to the upper right, where it says favored status. Now, this is what you were talking about a while ago, Jonathan. I'll come back to this in just a minute. There's references up there, children and others, blah, 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 all those references up there. And then the very final ring on there, the very final circle over there is a smaller one that goes around, and you follow that around, you'll see it kind of goes off to the right-hand side, and it says there, alive on earth. These are those alive on earth when Jesus returns. So basically, there's 4 types of people in the world today. There are the churched, the unchurched, those who are in a favored status, and those who will be alive, or all these people die, and those who will be alive on earth whenever the second coming happens. What's going to happen there? So let's start with the church. If you'll notice that there's an open pathway from the church down into the Hadean world to the area called paradise. When we die, that narrow road right there, that physical death, our decision-making is done, and we go from there right into paradise if we were of the church. We die in the church, we go to paradise, and we await the second coming of Christ. If you follow that up toward the right, you'll see that it's unobstructed. It's an unobstructed path from the church through the Hadean realm of paradise, right on up through the judgment where we all have to give account, right on into heaven. That's the path. Now, who else is going to get to do that? The favored status children, children who are under a certain age, children who are not the mentally handicapped, those who cannot make a decision for themselves, the mentally no matter what age they are, it could be a 45-year-old. If they do not have the mental capacity to make a decision for God, these people are in a favored status. They have earned paradise and consequently heaven automatically because they don't have the capacity to make a decision for salvation or not. So
Did you draw some of this also from King David when his son died?
You talking about Absalom?
Yeah, he said that he mourned and said that I'll be with my son again whenever King David's son died. So we have an instance of
David going to heaven or paradise, Sheol, the good side of Sheol, and Absalom going there.
Yeah, what I'm saying though is that when his son died, his son was very young, and
You're talking about with Bathsheba.
yes, and that correlates with what you're saying.
Yes,
Okay.
that child that died early because that was not supposed to happen, kind of thing, right? That child, it has no decision, it can't decide anything. So that child is going to have a one-way path straight to paradise and then right on up to heaven because they don't have a chance to, your kids, well, all my kids are older now, but so then becomes that age of or that age. What is that age limit there? At what age then do we fall out of the favored status, or what does it take to fall out of that favored status? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And you can kind of see on the left-hand side here, that second circle says the worldly. If you follow that worldly loop around there and it goes through, you'll see the wide road versus the narrow road. The wide road is what's talked about in scriptures, that's where everybody goes. This is the first death right here, right? When we die our physical death, we have a physical life, we die a physical death, we begin our spiritual life. That point right there of physical death is the first death. You cannot make a decision after that. I know that the Catholics have the idea of purgatory and you can re-earn your way back to heaven. Well, I don't see it that way. I don't think that's truth. And I don't think it's biblical either. But that's another story. I'm not going to get into all that. Okay, so, and where do you see on the bottom left-hand corner of this, you can see Hades. Where do you see that? Where do you get the idea of Hades? There's several scriptures right there that reference this. So I'm not going to get into that. You guys can go look into all that if you want to. But in any case, we die on earth. We go to the Hadean realm. We wait. We're in either paradise or Tartarus, the place of the bad down there. So we're in one of those two places. And then we go up to the judgment when Jesus Christ comes, right? Jesus Christ is that you're not going to be able to state your case or plead your case or plead your worth in front of Jesus. All Jesus wants you to do is give an account of yourself. Hey, tell me what you did, blah, blah, blah. And I know there's some different theological doctrines on that. I don't want to get into all that right now. I'm just saying here when the judgment comes, the second coming comes, there's plenty of references up there for people to look at if they want to. That's given an account, and then we go to our different places. If you are in the Hadean realm of Tartarus and the judgment comes, you're not going to get to heaven. You're simply going to go to what's called Gehenna. I'm sure you've heard of this, in the place of fire. And there's references there that take you there. This is called the second death. And again, there's references to that. So of importance to us with regards to Suicide, the Bible, and You is who's in a favored status. All this plays up here. Were we in the church? Were we in a favored status? Were we in a worldly state at the time of death? At the time we complete the act of suicide, which one of these three were we in? Were we in the favored status? Were we considered in the world? Or were we in the church? And it makes a tremendous difference as to the disposition of the soul of the one who completes the act of suicide. Does this make sense so far? You may not believe it, and I'm okay with that. I just want to know if you're kind of understanding it.
No, I understand. I understand your perspective. It's do you believe in nihilism? So do you believe that when someone dies, they cease to exist, or do you believe that there's a eternal torment for that person at the end, the lake of fire?
Depending on where you're at when you die, depending upon your stat, it's not over with there. I do believe that the spiritual body continues on. Now, what that looks like upon resurrection, I don't have any idea, right? And scripture doesn't say what it will look like either. But I do believe that when the physical dies, what's the opposite? The spiritual. We move on in the spiritual form, and we will be resurrected in the spiritual body. What that looks like, I don't have any idea. No one can really tell. Some people like to think that, well, we're going to go up there and I'll be able to recognize John Newby and we'll shake hands at the pearly gates and say, hey, I'm glad you made it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know that that's what's going to happen or not. Bible doesn't tell us that. Goes back to the silence of scriptures. Well, if the Bible doesn't say we are going to know each other, then we aren't. The Bible doesn't say.
We do get some sense that they know what's going on, though, like Lazarus about his brother, or the saints in heaven wanting who are martyred, wanting the judgment to come to those who martyred them. So, or it also, what is it in Romans, where the watchers they cheer us on, or is it Hebrews? So I think that there is a sense that they know what's going on. Do you agree with that?
I agree that there may be some sense like that. I don't know. I know that Lazarus, he's reaching up trying to get something. So there's some idea that he's reaching Abraham's bosom to get something. I agree with that.
Okay.
How far you go with that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is the Hadean realm. We're not talking about heaven and hell now.
Right.
We're talking about the center piece of this thing. So I agree, Jonathan, that there's some sense that there may be some recognition in there, but I do truly believe that upon physical death, its opposite is spiritual life or death, and we will continue on in this.
I'm gonna hit pause. I gotta resend you an invite because I didn't know this is the first time I've done this, and it says that I only have a short amount of time, so I gotta restart it.
Oh, okay.
Is that all right? All right, let me
We're cool.
second.
We're cool.
Let me hit you pause.
All right.
All right. Stop. End meeting for all. End meeting for all. All right, go ahead, brother.
Well, you may want to, I guess, just remind everybody this is part 2, I guess.
Part 2. Yep, this is part 2 because this is I don't have an account yet. So go ahead.
This is
we got 30 minutes.
Yeah, because all of the Podbean were 30-minute videos too, because they would shut off. It took me a while to figure that out, by the way. So I'll try to get this, at least this next segment in here without. Now I will at this point qualify myself just a little bit, because if anybody who's sat through the first part of this might be thinking, oh, this guy's a quack, who the heck does this guy think he really is? Well, listen, I went back to college when I was 42, and I spent the next several years in college. So I have a bachelor's in Bible and a master's in ministry from Freed-Hardeman University, and a master of divinity from Lipscomb University, and half of a doctorate of ministry from Tennessee Temple Baptist Seminary before they dropped out and I stopped. And then I spent 13 years as a correctional chaplain in medium maximum facilities in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky, and I'm now retired. So everything that I talk about in here is not things that I have made up. It's from the diligent study as I perceive the study. So it's not like I just dreamt this up one day. Okay, I think where we were is we had just finished talking about the after death chart, and I want to encourage and remind everybody once again that if you are interested in following along, you can go to the William Kizziar. You'll see my name in the bottom left, William Kizziar, all one word, williamkizziar.podbean.com, podbean.com, and you can follow along with some of this information here, and you can request the book if you want the book by subscribing to the Serve Ministries Inc. newsletter. And if you look at the bottom of that newsletter, toward the bottom of that, you'll see the book, and there's a link to that and how you can get that. So, okay. So that's kind of where we are with that stuff, I reckon. Okay. So we have been talking, we kind of ended up before we ran out of time talking about the after death chart and talking about the Hadean realm, the Hadean world. We talked a little bit about the world of opposites, and if there's a physical, then there's a physical life, physical death, and there's a spiritual life and death, and it kind of goes on, and you can catch up if you go back and listen to the first video that Jonathan is posting. All right, Jonathan, if you don't have any questions, we can move on to the suicide flow chart if you want to.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It looks interesting.
Okay, so like I said in the other one, if you are at the williamkizziar.podbean.com and you scroll down through there, you'll find a suicide flow chart. And if you'll put your mouse over that and right click that, you can open that up into a new tab and see the whole and all the details much, much better at that point. I will read this suicide flow chart on the left here for those who are not at the Podbean or don't go there. The suicide flow chart suggests now this is key here, that it suggests the disposition of the souls of those completing the act of suicide. Why is it a suggestion? Because I'm not God. I don't know. We talked earlier a little bit about the silence of the Bible, or the silence of Scripture. And I had a professor tell me one time that where the Bible is silent on a matter, then one man's opinion is as good as another man's opinion, because the Bible doesn't specify. And in this case, the Bible doesn't condone nor condemn the act of suicide, literally, specifically, whatever. So there's some room for speculation or for man's opinion. And that's where I've jumped in and thought, okay, let me give what I consider a learned response, or a studied and informative position on the matter, consequential to my own son's completing the act. So the suicide flow chart suggests the disposition of the souls of those completing the act of suicide. For example, Sion, which is a code word for BJ, Sion sat on the edge of his bed, placed a shotgun to his forehead, and depressed the trigger with his toe, killing himself. While no others were killed when he killed himself, this act is categorized as passive because nobody else was killed. Because he left a suicide note implying a degree of planning, he is categorized rational. It was planned. Because he was under the age of 20, his soul may have gone to paradise and consequently onward to heaven. Cowboy fancied himself. Cowboy was a guy I served with in Germany many years ago. Cowboy fancied himself a quick draw specialist. During one night of revelry, not realizing his .22 Magnum revolver was loaded, he drew down on the buddy, killing him with a single shot. He then placed the gun to his temple and pulled the trigger, killing himself. Because another was killed during this act, Cowboy is classified as aggressive. Because his act was impromptu and he was likely drunk, he is further categorized as irrational. Because he was over the age of 20, his soul may have gone to Tartarus or hell in the Hadean realm. Now, what's key to this part here is understanding how we came up with some of this stuff. Well, a lot of it falls back to the cities of refuge. And Jonathan, I know you're going to be familiar with the cities of refuge in the Old Testament. For those who are not, you can go and look this up in Numbers chapter 35 talks about it, Deuteronomy chapter 19, and Joshua chapter 20. You can find out about the cities of refuge. In short, what it says is that if the manslayer, if an individual intentionally kills another, and then runs to this city of refuge for safe harbor, the city elders will not let him in because he killed this other person intentionally. On the other hand, if a person unintentionally killed another and he ran to a city of refuge, then the elders would let him in because it was an unintentional act. Say, for instance, they were out moving rock around or something, and a rock fell on the guy's head and killed him. You know, he was moving the rock, he dropped it, it fell, it broke the guy's head, and so it was an unintentional act, it wasn't planned. So the cities of refuge sets this idea that the killer, if intentional, will not be welcome in the city of refuge. On the other hand, the opposites again, if the killers act was unintentional, then there's room for him in the city of refuge. Okay, again, my camera's over here and I'm looking over at Jonathan.
Good, brother.
So that's where this whole thing starts. I started looking, so there's got to be something, how do I try to figure out the disposition of the soul of one who completes the act of suicide? Where can I find biblical examples of this? And I landed in part on the cities of refuge. And so this is where part of this comes from. So let's look at the suicide flow chart up here. And you're going to see right across the top of it up there, there are three main categories. Aggressive and aggressive suicides are where others were killed during the act of him killing himself. And one of the examples I give you, if you go down the aggressive rational side, you'll see some examples down there. Harrison Klebold from the Columbine High School shooting, a suicide bomber, right? Those are examples of aggressive, rational suicides. They killed others in the act, and they had their mind about them. Now, so how do you define rational? Look underneath those bullet points right there. I killed myself. Yes, I killed myself. I was capable of rational thought. Yes, I had nothing hindering me there. I had unlimited control of my free moral agency. Now look at the footnote there. Free moral agency. Number one, go down to the bottom. Free moral agency, that is, we have free will. We can do what we want, when we want, where we want, with whom we want, how we want, for as long as we want, so long as we're willing to accept the consequences of our free will decision making. Now, that's what it means to have free will or free moral agency. So there was no limits on anything. He wasn't bound up, he wasn't kidnapped, he wasn't being forced to do anything. He had unlimited control. Death is in my control. You're going to be guilty of this sin. You will not be forgiven. I got a gnat flying around me. I apologize. And you're not safe from destruction. And destruction here, if you look there on number 3, that footnote number 3, I defined the bottom of destruction as being Tartarus or hell, being separated from the presence of God. So that's the idea of hell for me, is being separated from the presence of God. So when we start looking at an aggressive, rational suicide, then aggressive, others were killed. Rational, it was planned, it was an intentional act. This is what qualifies as rational. Here's some examples. Harrison Klebold from Columbine High School, a suicide bomber. Tartarus, and you'll see question marks here. Tartarus, because if he goes to Tartarus, that is the lower part of the Hadean realm, there's only one other place he can go beyond that during the judgment, and that's hell. But then again, I'm not God. I can't make these judgments, right? So that's why there's question marks there, because I really don't know, and I'm not the judge in any of this stuff. I'm merely putting forth an opinion. It's just an opinion. So back across the top again, aggressive, and then sacrificial and passive. Now, let's go back to aggressive. We talked about an aggressive, rational act of suicide, and here it is. What about an aggressive, irrational act of suicide? This irrational, to be claimed as irrational, I killed myself, yes, but I was not capable of rational thought. That is, I did not have control of my free moral agency. There was something else controlling what was going on. I had limited control. Death was out of my control. I think, what was it, Socrates or something was told he had to commit suicide by drinking poison. Okay, he committed suicide, but he was forced to drink poison. So it was out of his control. Something else was there. He was innocent of this sin. You can be forgiven, and you may be safe from destruction, that is, hell or separation from God. And here's a couple of examples here. One, Samson, right? Others died. It was an aggressive act, but it was unplanned. Samson may fall into this category. And then you got the cowboy who was likely drunk. Go ahead, Jonathan. You said something.
Let's say somebody kidnaps your kids, and this is like a Liam Neeson movie, okay? They kidnap your kids, and you're guaranteed 100% that they're going to come back to your wife, and your kids will be unharmed. But you got to, jump off a cliff. What would that be?
Who did the jumping?
So say John Newby and my kids are kidnapped.
Okay.
And they call up Rachel, my wife, and they say 100% if John kills himself, the kids will come back home unsafe. If not, then the kids will be harmed and are probably killed.
Okay.
So a lot for my life for theirs, but I have to take my life.
Okay. So what's the second category across the top of that?
Sacrificial.
Okay. So let's talk about sacrificial.
Okay.
Right now, well, I want to finish up. Let me finish up with the aggressive
All right.
irrational and go down that column there first, sir. And you've got your examples of Samson and the cowboy. And then I want to kind of touch on Leviticus. This idea of, if you look down there at the bottom of those two squares, it says 20 and above, Tartarus, hell, 19 and under, paradise, heaven. And you see the footnote number 8. Go down to number 8 down there in the footnotes where it says biblical favored status. Those 19 and under, those mentally or otherwise handicapped and unable to express their feelings and commitment to God.
Are you also getting some inspiration from the Old Testament where Jewish men, when they were 20 or older, were required to go serve and fight, and that bloodline was cut off from the desert and all that other stuff? That seems to be a number that pops up a couple times.
And is that the other day you told me, I think I have an idea where you got this 19 number at.
Yeah.
And if you look right here, well, I'm circling it, you can't see it, but if you look right there, Leviticus 27, verses 1 through 7.
Yeah.
1 Chronicles 27, 23. Numbers 14, 29. And Mark 10, 14. Leviticus, in this case, Leviticus is just simply evaluation. If somebody was going to dedicate their child to something and they didn't want to give the child up to the Levitical priesthood there, then they could give an equivalent amount of money.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the money was amount. What matters is that they were different. They distinctly identified different groups. And I'm there now. I'm looking at Leviticus 27, verse 3. Set the value of a male between the ages of 20 and 60 at one thing. For females, something else. For a person between the ages of 5 and 20, this is what they're valued at.
Yeah.
So it's not important what the amount is. It's just that they were designated this way.
Right.
So we're under 20.
So my speculation was right.
You are correct. And you're hitting it right again now. Because First Chronicles talks about taking the census, when David took the census to try to find out how many fighting men they had. What was the age? Those over 20 were to be counted.
Yeah.
Those under 20 were not to be counted. The same thing with numbers, right? You talked about those who had gone into the promised land, to scout out the promised land, the 12, one from each tribe, went into Jordan land milk honey, whatever. And so when they came back, and there were so many people complaining about not wanting to go there, then God sent them back into the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every, 1 year for every day that they were in, scouting out the land. And only those who were under the age of 20
Yep.
lived to go into the promised land.
Right.
So that's where the idea of the ages come from. Well, is there a difference between peoples and ages? Yes, there is. And the Old Testament and the Bible defines that there is a difference between these different age groups. That's where I got this.
They're saying the scripture differentiates age groups, so we can take that same logic and reason, and why couldn't we apply it to this, is what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think there's a biblical example here that we can go by. And the one reference to the New Testament, which is Mark 10:14, Mark 10:14 is just talking about, let the little children come unto me and do not hinder them. So there's a reference to little children again there. So this is where I get the idea that there may be something different happening between those who are, 5 years old and 19. And so if we read this chart down on the suicide flow chart, we have an aggressive, irrational suicide. Here's what irrational looks like. Here's some examples. And now I'm giving you the scriptural reference to the age identifier. Those are over the age of 20, who knew what they were doing or who did not know what they were doing, whatever the case is, right? They are over the age of 20 and they are at a different level of accountability to those who are under the age of 20. Will they go to Tartarus or hell? I don't know. There's question marks there. 19 and under, paradise and heaven? I don't know. Question marks again. So let's go then to just jump over the sacrificial for a minute, go to passive. If it is that aggressive suicide are those who killed others in the act, and a passive act of suicide is no one else was killed. And the same qualifiers, a passive rational was a planned out action. It was intentional. There's some examples here of Ahithophel and Zimri. You guys can go look those up. Those are the references there. It gives you the same markers with regards to age, a little bit lower. And then it identifies again 20 and above or 19 and under. And then you got passive irrational. Now, John, you talked about in this scenario that, well, no, we're not there yet. But let's talk about that for
Well,
just a
yeah, I did bring up like a mentally handicapped or someone like with Asperger's or something. So it would fall under irrational, unintentional, unplanned, correct? Not capable of rational thought, limited control of my FMA, death out of my control, innocent of sin, forgiven, safe of destruction.
correct. If nobody else was killed.
Right. And then you bring up Saul's armor bearer.
Right. And what happens in 1 Samuel 31:4 is that Saul's armor bearer sees Saul run through, and just right away, the way it sounds like in the text, that he just immediately falls on his sword and kills himself. What the heck did you do that for, brother? You know, because my
Yeah, I
boss,
said Josiah earlier, didn't I?
you said Josiah earlier.
Yeah, Saul, my bad.
So the armor bearer.
Yeah.
The distraught husband here. Let's say in your case again, Jonathan, well, I don't want to go in that case, but a distraught husband. Let's say that a distraught husband is one who, his wife, they were walking. I know at Freed-Hardeman University, there was a couple who was walking across the street and they were holding hands, and he stepped off the curb first and went on about his way. And about the time they got to the other side, they were stretched out holding hands, and a driver who was high on drugs had run down through there and had taken her right out of his hand and ran her over and killed her. Now he's a distraught husband. If he steps out in front of a bus, if he shoots himself, if he does something in the throes of emotion, that's an irrational act. It's unplanned. It's unintentional. It wasn't there. He was just distraught. He stepped off the balcony. He whatever, because he was emotional. He was just distraught over the whole thing. And the girlfriend is something different. Well, maybe I'll get there a little bit later. So let's talk about. So there's you got the aggressive rational, you got an aggressive irrational, you got a passive rational, a passive irrational, and then you got a sacrificial. Now this is what alludes to you, Jonathan. John 15, verse 13, the sacrifice, paradise. Now I use Jesus Christ here, but I want to point out the footnote number 4. Footnote number 4 says, figuratively speaking, to speak of Jesus's death as a suicide is wrong. We must speak of his death as sacrificial. We must speak of his death as sacrificial. Resurrection and ascension are key elements of his death. So it's wrong for us to identify, to say that Jesus committed suicide. No, Jesus sacrificed himself for us. But along with that, PFC James Anderson, that's on this suicide chart here. PFC James Anderson was a guy in Vietnam who was, they were engaged in a firefight, and a grenade come by, landed beside him. He grabbed the grenade, pulled it into him, curled it around him, and killed himself, sacrificed himself for others. I think this guy has earned the grace from God because he sacrificed himself to go to heaven. There's no question about anything else. It was an impromptu act. He sacrificed himself for others.
So if he was a Muslim that did that, do you think that person enters heaven?
I think he gets a free pass because he sacrificed his own life. Now, don't get that confused with the 9/11 plane bombers who flew into the deal. That's not it. You know, this is something different than a aggressive irrational. It's just something different there. Well, you could classify that as, you know, because nobody else was killed, but a passive irrational, even if it was passive irrational, does he go to paradise? Does he go to heaven? I don't know. I lean toward he does. And so PFC James Anderson did that. Now, under your scenario, Jonathan, your wife and your kids have been kidnapped, and you thought without any doubt in your mind that, or you believe the kidnappers when they said, we will release your family if you jump off that 10-story building and kill yourself, sacrificing yourself for them. If you believe that in the depths of your heart, that that's what would happen, and you took your own life, in my opinion, you'd be classified as a sacrificial suicide. And I think that there's room there for heaven. Again, it's the opinion of one man.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, uh, you asked me earlier if I agree or disagree. Like, the realms and everything. I don't know. I don't agree with you about the Muslim going to heaven, but I do believe, or I do agree with you in this scenario that the that act of a sacrifice, it wouldn't be me taking my life; it would be me giving my life under the assumption and under the pretense that I'm giving it for the exchange of my children to come back without being harmed. So I would view that I would agree with you about how that on your suicide flow chart.
Well, let's differentiate. You used Muslim a while ago as a deal. Let's kind of, and I said yes to that, but in an attempt to win you over, I will say keep Islam over there. We are talking about Christianity.
Okay.
What the Islam's doing if they get their 70 virgins, I have no idea what's going on over. That's their thing. So, and I'm joking about trying to win you over, but it's just to inform you. I want to clarify that just a little bit there. So,
Hey, this is a very thick um, conversation. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. Like,
yes.
there's a lot of unknown variables in this. And first
Yep.
of all, anybody who's watching this video might want to pick you apart and critique you, and they're obviously their right to do so.
Yep.
But how many people have tried to tackle this like this? This is very in depth, and you're someone who lost your son, and I can hear your heartache through your studies, and you trying to come to an understanding of it. And I think you're also showing vulnerability by doing that. So yeah, there might be somebody, like, by use your own words, that somebody might think you're crazy or something like that. I don't think you're crazy. I think you're trying to tackle a very tough topic that a lot of people don't tackle. And so it's easy to Monday quarterback chair somebody, or the terminology, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They can sit back and just want to pick you apart, but then maybe perhaps they should come up with their own and see how it it goes against this. But I think what you've said so far is interesting. Like I said, I don't know about the realm stuff, but I don't know. I'm not saying I don't disagree with you, brother, but yeah, I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
I'm okay with that because a lot of people may not do this, but you're right. I haven't, I haven't, in part of the book, what I talk about there is that there's an accountability piece in here that talks about, I sent surveys to, okay, I sent surveys to 750 churches, asking them to define terms like accountability, age of accountability, responsibility. Because once my son died, then what we got when I started asking questions and my wife started asking questions, well, what's the disposition of his soul? Where did his soul go? Well, that depends on, if he was being held accountable or not. What does that mean? What is that age of accountability? Well, it really depends on whether or not he was responsible for his actions. What? You're telling me it depends if he's responsible or he's accountable? So the book goes into talking about those terms.
Sure.
And it talks about accountability, but you're correct. I haven't found anybody else that's done this type of
Yeah,
work.
like I have a couple of videos on aliens, a Christian perspective on aliens.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to other Christians about it, and some of my views are out there, no pun intended. But I'm like, okay, well, what's your perspective? And they're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, okay,
Well, what we say a while ago, Jonathan, about the silence of scriptures.
yeah, yeah,
If the Bible doesn't tell us one way or the other, then for mankind to offer an opinion, acknowledge that.
yeah,
It's just an opinion.
yeah,
This is my learned opinion
right,
about what I think will happen. Now, some will say, well, Kizziar, you just did that so you could put your 15-year-old son in heaven. That's what you're doing with all this. Well, no, that's not what I was doing. I was looking for something greater than that. And which is how I came up with this. And I still classified him as being passive rational because he claimed that there was a suicide note. So any case, that's I had something else I was going to say about that, but it drifted away from me during the conversation. So, um, Was there anything else? I mean, Jonathan, do you have anything else? You can find more about this. I think I talked more about it in the podcast, and you can certainly find a whole lot more about this in the book.
No,
Uh,
I think you're doing a good job. And like I said, this is a very tough topic that a lot of people don't tackle. And you put yourself out there, and you're doing a good job so far.
well, and there's a lot of folks. I know my brother is engaged in a memorial. It's called the Heroes Memorial in Dallas, Texas, in which they want to honor the life of the person who commits the act of suicide. They don't want to focus on the act of suicide, but rather the life of the one who completed the act, much like police officers, of which you are. Thank you for that service. But if a police officer commits the act of suicide for one reason or another, they want to celebrate his life.
Sure.
Okay, celebrate his life. I'm fine with that. But that's not a suicide prevention program. That's a life recognition thing. They're
Sure.
not celebrating suicide. And I just don't think, when I said it earlier that suicide is not a title or action for those who have completed the act, I don't want to celebrate the death of an officer, but rather an eternal consequence endured by those left behind. Let's not disregard the survivors of that suicide, because the individual who completes the act of suicide isn't going to be here to live through his actions,
Yeah.
but the friends and family will be.
Sure.
And those are the true sufferers of the act of suicide, not the one who completes the act. So I kind of want to, so mine is the suicide prevention idea that suggests what happens to the disposition of the soul. Now, we're not even talking about, or there's in the book, there's another piece that talks about who is spiritually accountable. Who is spiritually accountable for the one who completes the act of suicide? Now, the one who completes the act of suicide is going to be accountable, and there's going to be disposition of the soul, but who is spiritually accountable? So when I look at my son and he died, who do I blame spiritually for his death? BJ? It depends. Time remaining 9:55. Okay, I'm trying to wrap this up. So anyway, it goes into a whole different thing about who's spiritually accountable. And so there's a thing that I target fathers and mothers. And so there's a great deal of sadness that I had to go through because I found myself to be at least in part spiritually accountable for his spiritual development as the father. And so there's some thing, you can get that in the book if you guys want to tackle into that.
If that is the case, all sins are forgiven, right?
There is true. And there is a part of that talks about there that there is something. I don't have to live, and going along that scenario there, if I am spiritually accountable for the death of BJ, I don't have to live in that guilt for the rest of my life because there is forgiveness.
Correct.
I can live, I can ask for forgiveness, I can repent, I can seek out Jesus Christ, I can be forgiven for my sin of not developing him spiritually.
Correct.
So yes, there is again. That's what allows us to go forward.
Yeah, the only unforgivable sins blasphemy the Holy Spirit, and you didn't do that. So
right. I also think that there's a piece of the unforgiven piece on that is because if you're going to kill yourself, you can't forgive yourself beforehand. Because up until the act, you can stop. You cannot do it. You can't say, Lord, forgive me for what I'm about to do. Boom, pull the trigger, right? Because up until the point you pull the trigger, you can always not pull the trigger. So what do you do after the fact? Well, this is what all this kind of stuff is talking about. So, okay, let's kind of move on. And I want to touch on this. It may have to be that we go into a third session here. I don't know. Don't try not to do that, but you tell me if you want to go into something like that. Okay, let's go on to the next. Scroll down a little bit. We come across someone I know has died. What do I do? What do I do if someone I know has died? This is chaplaincy all the way around, brother. And you're going to find out in a minute. I'm going to ask you a test question in a minute, right, as we go through this, and I want to see what you answer. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, so what do I do? Someone I know has died. What do I do? How do I respond? The first bar. Well, here's some questions. Was the deceased related to you by blood? On the left, yes. On the right, no. Let's follow the no for a minute, because that's where most of us are. Was the deceased related to you by blood? No. Then here's what you do. This is the chaplain thing here, right here. You be there, you be silent, you give them permission to speak, you weep with them, and don't try to explain what happened. This is Chaplain 101 right here. And so once you go there, you follow the lines on down. What you want to avoid doing is qualifying yourself. Well, you know what? My so-and-so died too. Okay, that might, get me to lower the window in the room so we can have a conversation, but you're nowhere near where I am because circumstances surrounding my son's death is not yours. So avoid qualifying yourself and avoid platitudes. Hang in there. Things will get better. You know what? I heard that so many times from pastors and people after BJ died. All I wanted to do was just say, shut up. You have no idea. Did your son commit suicide? Was he your only biological son? How do you know? Don't offer me a platitude. And if we don't know what platitudes are, is they're sayings that happen so often that they lose their meaning.
Yeah, like what's up?
What's up would be kind of a platitude, but more
Yeah,
like
you're not like what's up.
Oh, what's up? Or he's in a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you know that? You don't know that. Shut up.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. How do you know that?
Yeah.
You trying to bring comfort to me? I don't want to hear it.
What if it's a dirt bag didn't know the Lord? They're not resting.
You don't know. So avoid qualifying yourself by trying to do like that'll come later.
Yeah.
And don't offer platitudes. Now, here's a piece I want to ask you to. What does this sound like to you, Jonathan? Avoid these things, but it's okay to cry with them. It's okay to be unhappy. It's okay to get angry, to lament, feel heartbroken, try to understand, and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
What does that sound like to you with regards to SMI chaplain's course?
The cycle?
The cycle, the H3 cycle.
Yeah.
You're hurting, you're healing, and you're helping. And this is where the H3 cycle fits in.
I got the test question right.
You did. I'll give you a point for that. Of course, it's only a 1-point test, so you got 100. And then you can kind of follow that other side around. Was the deceased related to you by blood? Yes. Was it by his own hand? Yes. We'll go see the suicide flow chart. Was it by his own hand? No. Was it by another's hand? No. Was it natural death, disease, or unknown? And then go to your left there. Can you give it to God? If you can give it to God, yes, then pray, forgive, and talk with others. And a Samaritan counselor would be one of those you go to. Right? Can you give it to God? No, I cannot. Seek counseling now. Go see a pastoral counselor, go see a professional counselor if you can't give it to God.
Yeah.
So this is kind of some suggestions on what we can do there. I know I'm going to wrap it up, brother. We're going to keep going here.
All right.
So, and the last thing I want to leave us with, if we scroll down, I don't ever want to leave this thing without some sort of suicide intervention program. Well, what can you do though on the side before death? What can you do? Well, here's some very simple things. Suicide, the acronym, suicide intervention. When our reaction to a stressful event is based on the unrealistic perception of that event, a crisis may result. When adequate situational support is unavailable or we have inadequate problem-solving skills, crisis may result. If we can help others realize that their perceived crisis is just a life transition, and Mike talks about this in his book too, is just a life transition. We can dramatically reduce its effect and help them regain stability in their lives. So regarding adolescents, I offer perhaps an overly simplified approach to crisis intervention, and I use the acronym SUICIDE. So what is the acronym SUICIDE? First, S, start the day with prayer. Start the day with prayer with your family, right? Don't leave that out of anything. If you want to try to win over your kids, start the day with prayer. Number two, or the second, you understand that their mindset is one of you, right? They're kids. They don't know. I don't care if a 17 or 18-year-old acts like he knows everything. He knows squat. And you know that, Jonathan, and I know that. They're still kids.
Yeah.
The I stand for influence, not insult. Many times our children are the recipients of our bad attitude. Is it any wonder that they grow up wanting to be like other men and other women? If we as adults suffer from insults, is it any less to expect that our kids will too? All right, it's not. The next, the C, is care about what they're doing. Take the time when you get home from work. Take the time to address your kids and see how they're doing. It's okay to hug them, right? Jonathan, you're a big man, right? You got two girls. Well, it's not going to matter. I hope this other one is a boy. Is it a boy or a girl?
Boy.
Is it a boy? When you get that boy and he becomes 15 and 16, I'm letting you know it's okay to hug that kid, right? We don't have to be too big of a man to not do that. And then deliverance, not damnation. When they come to us for help and understanding, do we condemn them for their actions and coldly subjugate them to their consequences? Or do we help them? It makes a big difference in the life of a child. I learned it too late. And then end the day in prayer. How often do we hold hands around a supper table and thank God for the day, our families, and our food? Remember, this simple acronym may help prevent the suicide of a loved one. So this is the intervention technique there. And I know we got about a minute left. And so I want to say again that my deterrent is don't do it. If you want the material that's in the book, you're welcome to go get it. Go sign up in it. Subscribe to the newsletter on the Serve Ministries Inc.com website and see what you have to do to get the book. All right. I'll give you the last minute, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
No, you did a great job. Man. I got 3 girls. So my wife, if I didn't recognize that, my wife would kill me. So 3 girls. But
oh, 3 girls, you corrected me now. Okay.
all right, good. And a son will be here soon.
Okay.
But listen, y'all, this is a very tough topic. And our brother here poured out his heart and his soul to you. It might be some new concepts you've never heard before. Like I said, this is some stuff I've never heard. But he's doing the best he can with a very tough topic that a lot of people won't talk about. And so pray for him. Pray for him. He still hurts, obviously. So let's pray for him and check out his go to that. I'll put the link down.
WilliamKizziar.podbean.com.
Yeah, go. I'll put the link down there. Say it one more time, brother.
WilliamKizziar.podbean.com.
All right. All right, brother Bill. We've got like 30 seconds. I want to appreciate you for coming on.
Suicide. Don't do it.
Amen. Amen. God bless y'all. Thank you for listening.